Hello, everyone. I'm Vincent Scheip. I'm a member of the Cats and Rats community and occasional co-host of the post-game Twitter Spaces. Our good friend Kirby Lupel asked me a few months ago to take a look at some prospects that the Panthers could potentially select with their picks in the 2024 draft that happened last week in Las Vegas. And as a result, I designed a web program to look at all of these different prospects and compare a lot of their numbers, a lot of their season results and rankings together. So with the 2024 draft having just happened, I'm going to be running through each of the players that the Panthers selected and giving my take on them, going through their season results and where I think their upside may be and what I think of the guys that the team picked. But before we get into the players that we selected, let's just do a quick little breakdown of the picks that they had going into the day and the moves that they made throughout the day. So heading into the 2024 draft, we entered with 5 picks, our own 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 7th, and Philadelphia's 5th. We traded away our 2024 first to Philadelphia in the deal back in 2022 that got the Panthers Claude Giroux. That was also the deal where we acquired Philly's 2024 fifth. The 2024 second was traded to what is now Utah in the deal that opened up Anton Strawman's cap money. And our own 2024 fifth was traded to Buffalo to complete the deal that got us Kyle Okposo. On the day of the draft, we acquired the 58th overall pick from Toronto in exchange for a 2025 second and our own 2024 7th round pick, which was the very last pick in the draft, 225th overall. And Seattle, we made a trade with Seattle, where Seattle traded up for the 141st pick in the 5th round, and we acquired picks number 169 in the 6th round and number 201 in the 7th round, which explains how we go from 5 picks to 6 picks. And with that, let's take a deeper look into the guys that we picked in this year's 2024 draft. And with our first selection in the 2024 draft in the 2nd round at 58th overall, the Florida Panthers selected Linus Eriksson, a center from Sweden who is 6 foot tall and 190 pounds. Not overpowering in terms of size, but certainly far from undersized as well. He was the 10th ranked European skater by NHL Central Scouting, as you can see here, and was a consensus top 55 pick from all other outlets mentioned and included in this app. The only outlet and ranking system that had him outside the top 50 was the one done by Jason Bukala at Sportsnet, who had him at 52nd overall. This season, Linus split time between the Swedish Under-20 League, known as the J20 National, and the Swedish second tier, known as the Allsvenskan, for Djurgårdens. In the J20, as you can see, Linus had 21 points in 25 games with 5 goals and 16 assists and 10 penalty minutes. So he scored at a very good 0.84 points per game. It's a very good player from a 17-18-year-old at the Under-20 level. His goals to assist ratio of 0.31 shows that he obviously has a lot more assists than he does goals. And his penalty minutes per game at 0.4 shows he doesn't take a lot of penalties, which is always a plus. In his professional work in the Allsvenskan, he had 11 points in 29 games with 3 goals and 8 assists and 10 penalty minutes as well. So his points per game, as you can see, noticeably drops from the Under-20 level to the professional level. His goals to assist ratio and his penalty minutes per game stay very similar. They stay close together, which is usually a pretty good sign. In terms of strengths, Linus is very intelligent, has a very strong hockey IQ, and plays a competent 200-foot game. And his skating is also a strength. All hallmarks of a pick made in the Bill Zito era for Florida. He plays a very projectable pro-style game and plays a style that would fit how the Panthers want their guys to play very well. In terms of weaknesses, His playmaking does need some work, and he can have some consistency issues from game to game, which leads to questions about his offensive upside. And going to the scatter plot where I have points per game and NHL equivalency here, Linus is this red dot right here. As you can see, there are some other players from this draft class that the Panthers could have selected going around, like, for example, Tommaso DeLuca, who I just highlighted here, and Timofey Julin, who's right next to him. The most notable neighbor that Eriksson has in this graph would be Juraj Slafkovsky, shown here. The first overall pick in 2022. Each of the tan dots, by the way, represents one of the top 64 skaters selected in both the 2022 and 23 drafts. This obviously doesn't mean that Eriksson is going to become Juraj Slafkovsky. It's just an indication that even though his production may not jump out at you, it's not exactly something to be overly concerned about at the present time, as there are players like Slafkovsky taken first overall, Hunter Haidt, and Anton Wahlberg, both of whom were top 64 picks in 2022 and 23, that, taking Eriksson really isn't that much of a concern. And if you look at his total points throughout the year, he scored the same amount of points as Igor Chernyshев, who was seen as a potential first-round pick. He ended up going 33rd overall, so just outside. And he also scored in a similar number of points to Max Karan, Jack Berglund, and Atos Koivu, all of whom were selected in this year's draft. And with our third round selection in this year's draft at 97th overall, the Panthers selected Matvei Shuravin, a Russian defenseman who stands at 6'4" and weighs 218 pounds, and was the 15th ranked European skater by NHL Central Scouting. As you can see here, his rankings were a little bit all over the board, and he split time between all three levels of the Russian hockey system with his team, CSKA Moscow, also known as the Red Army. He played 11 KHL games, managed 2 points, both assists, and 2 penalty minutes. Now, if you notice the high NHL equivalency here, that's because the KHL is a very strong league. If you were to rank each league on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the NHL, the best league in the world, the KHL is about a 9.4. So if you're wondering why that number is so high, that's why. He played 5 games in the VHL, the Russian second tier, and didn't record any points or penalty minutes. And in the Russian junior system, 22 games, recorded 7 points, all of them assists, and 26 penalty minutes. In terms of his strengths, Shuravin's skating is very smooth and efficient, and he plays an extremely smart and cerebral defensive game. These are both pluses and things that are very vital if you want to be a successful defenseman in today's NHL. He also leverages his size well and can play big when he needs to. The only real problems with him are that his shot lacks power and velocity. It isn't really a threat. And one that's kind of actually a really big red flag is he's very bad in transition, especially at exiting his own end. Little rule of thumb for the viewers listening, for those who might be uninitiated: if a forward struggles at entering the zone, that's a red flag. If a defenseman struggles at exiting the zone, that's a red flag. In fact, elite prospects in their metrics had him ranked in the third percentile among draft-eligible defensemen for his transition play. So that is a huge weak spot, and he'll definitely need to fix that if he wants to become an NHL caliber player. And if you're looking at some of his comparables on the chart here, as you can see, he doesn't really have a lot of neighbors other than Leon Bischel, but Bischel was a first-round pick back in 2022, so it's not all bad news on that front. And also Aaron Kiviharju at one point was a projected first-round pick. In this draft, he ended up going in the 4th or 5th round to Minnesota, I believe. Also not that far off from him. And so was Anton Salayev, who of course went 10th overall in this year's draft to New Jersey. In terms of point production, again, Shuravin not really producing a lot of points, but again, he's not that far off from Anton Salayev, who was a top 10 pick in this year's draft. So if you're really worried about points, I wouldn't be, because his game is more modeled off of his defensive abilities. I would say that's probably more important, especially when evaluating defensemen. In terms of what Sharavin's upside is, I would say most likely a bottom pair, play-killing defensive defenseman, and a penalty kill specialist, but he could hit second pair if his offensive game does improve. And with our fourth round selection at 129th overall, the Panthers return to Sweden and select Simon Zether. Zether's a bit of a bigger bodied center, standing at 6'3" and weighing 187 pounds. Very similar body composition to Eetu Luostarinen. And as you can see here, he was the 18th ranked European skater by NHL Central Scouting. And the other major outlets that had Zether ranked had him pegged as a third or fourth round pick, so another pick where the team doesn't really go off the board. He split time between the Swedish Under-20 League and the SHL, very similar to Linus Eriksson, only Zether played in the higher division at the SHL level and played for Rögle. As you can see, produced very well at the Under-20 level, getting 27 points in 18 games, and spent the majority of his season in the SHL, where he may have only got 4 points, but it is worth mentioning he had a very low time on ice. So again, while the production doesn't exactly jump out at you, it's not something that I would be overly concerned about, and this is a common occurrence for young prospects playing in European leagues. When they play in the SHL, they play in Liga, they don't always get a lot of ice time, so the production may not always be there. That happens normally. Don't worry too much about it. In terms of Zether's strengths, he's very good in tight areas and is very physical. Defensively, he plays a very strong game, and he has good vision and hockey sense. Very similar to Eriksson in that regard, although I don't think the offensive upside is there with Zether as it is with Eriksson. With Zether, also his foot speed and skating will need a lot of work, and I'm sure those of you that watch many modern NHL games understand the importance of being fast and skating. That is going to be a big area for improvement for him if he wants a chance at becoming an NHL player. Looking at his comparables, as you can see here, Zether, the red dot. You also see some players like Austin Baker and Ethan Precision, both of whom I believe were selected in this year's draft. And also another interesting comparison here would be Otto Stenberg, who was a first-round pick of St. Louis back in 2023 in the mid-20s. So again, the production may not jump out at you. The production might concern you. I wouldn't be too concerned about it. If he's putting up numbers comparable to a player who was taken in the first round recently, then it's really not that far off from where someone arguably should be. In terms of his total points of the year, obviously those 27 points at the under-20 level, doing some very heavy lifting with the same amount of points as Atus Koivu, who was selected by Montreal in this year's draft, and the very similar point total to Igor Chernyshев and Michael Brandsegg-Nygaard, both of whom were projected first-round picks in this year's draft. In terms of projection for Zether, I believe his ceiling would be as a fourth-line shutdown defensive center, very similar to the recently departed Panther Kevin Stenlund. And with our first of two sixth-round selections, 169th overall, this pick, the Panthers selected Stepan Gorbunov. Gorbunov, a center from Russia, who is 6'5" and weighs 196 pounds, so a very, very tall player. What's also interesting is that Gorbunov is one of the youngest players in the draft class, with a birthday in August of 2006, which is important because the belief is if a player is on the younger end of the draft class, so June to August birthday of that draft year, they would have more of a runway to develop and therefore are more likely to become steals, as you would call them, from later round picks. Gorbunov was unranked by pretty much every major outlet that was researched in the development of the program, but NHL Central Scouting had him ranked as their 99th best European skater. He spent the entire season in the MHL with Traktor Chelyabinsk's junior team, scoring 22 points in 40 games and getting 10 penalty minutes. He also spent a very brief time with Traktor's under-18 team where he played 2 games and scored a goal. In terms of his strengths, obviously his great size. You stand at 6'5". That's a very projectable frame. He does need to fill out at 196 pounds, but he has the frame to fill out. He does a lot of defensive work and sometimes almost plays as a third defenseman. But that's kind of where the strengths end with him. In terms of his weaknesses, he's very slow. He lacks speed. His skating is poor. His puck skills are not great. He's a non-factor offensively. His shot may be heavy, but he doesn't get it off very quickly. There's a lot to work on for Stepan Gorbunov, but there are some traits there that do make a pick like this interesting. And if you're looking at some of the comparables from his draft year, again, here's Gorbunov, the red dot. All is not lost because Emil Hemming, who was a first-round pick in this year's draft, was also put up similar results in terms of points per game. Let's see. Oscar Fisker-Molgaard, who was a top second-round pick in 2023, and Martin Misiak, another second-round pick in 2023. So a pair of second-round picks are some close comparables for Gorbunov in terms of his production and his NHL equivalency. So again, while the weaknesses in his game are many and apparent, all is not lost for this young man. In terms of his point production this year, the news isn't great. The only players that were picked that are even close to Gorbunov in terms of production are Nikita Artamonov and Kasper Pikkarainen. All of these other players here, Faizov, Babenko, DeLuca, Swoniemi, were not selected. Artamonov was, and Pikkarainen was as well. In terms of projection for Gorbunov, I believe he is a likely AHL player at best, maybe a fourth-line center if the skating improves. However, I think if he switches to defense, switches from forward to defense, he might have a better shot at making it. And I believe that will probably be the best route for Gorbunov to become an NHL player. And with our other sixth-round pick in this year's draft at 193rd overall, the Panthers selected Hunter St. Martin. St. Martin is a left winger from Edmonton, Canada, and he stands at 6'2" and weighs 174 pounds. As you can see, he is an overager, as his birthday was in summer of 2005, so this is not his first year of draft eligibility. He was first draft eligible last year in 2023. As a result, he is unranked by all major outlets that were included in this program, including NHL Central Scouting. He did spend the entire season in the Western Hockey League with the Medicine Hat Tigers, where he scored 52 points, 24 of which were goals, in 68 games. He also managed 50 penalty minutes in that time. In terms of his strengths, St. Martin is a toolsy player with a strong motor. He's always working, and he controls the puck and protects it well. For his weaknesses, he does sometimes lack ability to separate himself from defenders. His passing skills did make some progress, but still needs some more refinement, and he needs to add more strength if he wants to transition from juniors to the pros. As weighing 174 pounds, he's already slight of frame, even at the junior level. Comparing him to some of his neighbors, as you can see, once again, St. Martin is the red dot here. He's near Hiroki Godzic and Carson Wetch, both of whom were selected in this year's draft, and some other neighbors near him were Dalibor Dvorsky, 10th overall pick back in 2023, and Easton Cowan, who was a first-round pick in 2023 and had a breakout campaign in the OHL this year for the London Knights. Now again, St. Martin's an overager, so comparing him to Easton Cowan is a little bit much, but in terms of production, that's what the data is showing right now. In terms of total points, St. Martin doesn't have that many bad neighbors, as all of these comparables other than Luke Mistelbacher and Marco Mignosa, and Mignosa is another overager, were selected in this year's draft. Kevin He was selected, Ilya Protas, Carson Wetch, and Andrei Krudov. The other players shown here on this bar graph were all selected. In terms of St. Martin's projection, I believe him to be an AHL forward who will be good organizational depth and could come in for a spot start if needed. His absolute peak, in my opinion, would be as a 13th or 14th forward. And with our final selection in the 2024 draft, the Panthers selected Denis Gabdrikmanov, a Russian goaltender who stands at 6'3" and weighs 187 pounds. And because he's a goaltender, you won't see any program or app that I designed here because the app only includes skaters. Just an FYI to any of you listeners wondering why you're seeing a stock image. Gabdrikmanov is an overager with a birthday in June of 2005. He only played 7 games in 2022-23, which likely explains why he was passed over last year in his first year of eligibility. And he played this entire season for Tyumensky Legion in the MHL, the Russian Junior League. In 40 games, he had a goals against average of .255 and a .924 save percentage. He also had a shutout for a team that was not very good, as evidenced by his 10-20-7 total record. In his 7 games in 2023, interesting side note, he had a .920 save percentage. Another little fun fact about Gabdrikmanov is his last name is worth 29 Scrabble points, which breaks the previous record, which was actually set by another 7th rounder for the Panthers from last year, actually, Stepan Zvayagin, whose last name was worth 23 Scrabble points. So Gabdrikmanov already making history with his selection. In terms of predicting what he will be, I can't really make a prediction as to that, as the general consensus has always been goalies are pretty much voodoo. It's basically impossible to make any projections of a goaltender based on public metrics. That being said, I won't fault the selection of a goaltender because you never know which one is going to end up becoming a very good goaltender. And of course, given the fact that Russia's developed a lot of great goaltenders in recent years, I certainly won't fault anybody for taking a chance on a Russian goaltender. So that concludes this look at the 2024 Panthers draft class. I'd like to thank you for watching and taking the time out of your day to watch this video. And if you would like to get access to this app and take a look at the players we selected as well as some other players that I think we selected, the link to that will be in the description below. It is perfectly free for you to access and use it. And I hope you hit that like and subscribe button. And once again, thank you again for watching and passing it right through. And be sure to listen to the Cats and Rats podcast, available on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.